And on the line right now, we've got the Conservative candidate for East Midlands Mayor. It's Ben Bradley. Nice to have you, and thanks for joining us.
No worries at all.
I guess I've got to start with the obvious question. Why do we need this new mayor? And in your opinion, why should it be you?
Well, there's two reasons why we need it. The first is that it's a £4 billion investment in our part of the world, so we need the funding. You really have to look at our roads or our transport infrastructure to see that we need the funding. So that's important. The other one is that this structure is important. So we've had 18 different councils across Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire who do 18 different sets of things, duplicate everything, compete for funding. And actually, by having one shared set of priorities, one clear plan in terms of what it is we want from government or from private sector investors, we can deliver a lot more because we know what it is we're after.
That roads topic was, when we opened it up to our listeners and we asked for questions, that was a big one that came up because, I mean, we look at, we've got Mansfield Roadhouse down the road here where you could almost fake the moon landings with the state of the roads there. So what's the actual day-to-day difference you'd get from yourself as East Midlands Mayor versus yourself as head of the county council?
Well, the biggest difference is the mayor will have 4 times more funding. And I've spent the last 2 years recognising that this is a huge problem, right? And one that we just can't afford to fix in the current budgets locally. Rather than pointing fingers at other people, I've been to find the funding. I've secured a £1.5 billion transport fund. So that's the difference, right? You're going to have the funding to do this thing and do it properly and to invest massively in the roads. And you said earlier, what do residents get from me as the mayor? Well, that's top of my list. You will get a massive road resurfacing programme as my first act, really. But significantly, we can also invest in public transport, our buses and trains and how we get around the region. And things like regeneration, I want to make sure that we are bringing business into our town centres, that we're helping to fill those empty shops and to tackle some of these issues that really our current structures just make it really difficult to manage.
You mentioned public transport. One of the hot topics with this being Sherwood is, of course, that Robin Hood extension line that's been promised for ages and ages and ages now. Is that one of the ones that's on your agenda?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one, and there are all sorts of projects like it where we've been trying for a decade or more to get it to happen, but it's not really entirely within our gift. We try and put a business plan together. We try and pick the Treasury kind of tick boxes around it all, and then they get to decide. Whereas under this new structure, the mayor will have much more clout to do the work, to control what it looks like. The problem with the Robin Hood line is Network Rail don't want us really to make a viable business case because it creates overwork and problems for them. So they've never really worked with us in terms of trying to put something together. So the mayor can really, change the game in terms of making it more cost effective, looking at more innovative ways of delivering it, joining up the whole transport strategy to make it more meaningful when we do deliver it, linking it into all the tourist hotspots in Sherwood Forest, for example, so you get more bang for your buck, and then we can get it done.
You mentioned that wide geography. The East Midlands Mayor covers, I think it's out to Glossop in the northwest, where you'll be queuing in the mornings to get to Manchester, and you go much further north than where you are here in Sherwood, and you start to look towards Sheffield for your day-to-day stuff. So how do you plan to deliver a sort of joined-up plan when you've got that going on with the geography?
Yeah, well, it's all Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire, so it is a big geography. It's 2.5 hours from one corner to the other. But the key thing here is it's not about trying to take all your local stuff in your town up to a regional level. It's about trying to take things that happen currently in London and bring those down to a more local level. So where, for example, in London at the minute, the Department for Transport, they'll decide what the key rail connections are for us as a region, for example. And we're going, we want the Robin Hood line, and somebody in Westminster is saying, no, that's not what we want. It's Westminster that gets to decide, whereas under this new structure, it will be us. So we can make that much more local decision, much closer to your community and to people who know your community, whether you're in the High Peak or you're in Nottingham City Centre.
You're talking about that local input there. Are you looking at some sort of structure like citizens' assemblies or anything like that?
Well, we've got obviously elected councils across the whole region, 18 different ones, too many, some might argue. But we've got people who are there to speak to their communities, who know their communities, and are elected to do that. We need to make sure all those people are in the tent, part of the decision making, so that we are being more local and not, as I say, taking things away and up to a regional level. And equally, there'll be within the decision making structure, there will be space for business, for our colleges, for our universities, for all those kind of stakeholders who are directly involved in the things that the mayor will deliver. So investment, transport, skills and training, all those spokespeople, all those stakeholders who deliver that across the region need to be in the tent, so we're building something that works.
All right, so it's almost like a figurehead and the local delivery element still exists as it is today, but under that one direction. Would that be a fair interpretation?
I think it depends who's in charge, but I certainly see it as the mayor being the chairman of a partnership, effectively, as you described. It's getting everybody who's currently trying to do things in a very complicated system to get around the table and do things together instead, with a shared plan, instead of duplicating everything and competing around everything. And then we can deliver more bang for our buck, along with the £4 billion of extra funding that comes with it. If you get it wrong, if you get a mayor who feels differently or doesn't know what they're doing, then you could easily build a big, expensive bureaucracy that sits on top of all the other big, expensive bureaucracies, and I don't think that's what anyone wants. So I do think it's really important that we get a mayor at the end of this, regardless of political party, who understands what's needed and understands all those partners.
Yeah. I mean, look at it here. This will be effectively a fourth level of local government. But you talk about that £4 billion figure. What sort of time period is that over? Is that yearly? Is that over a 4-year stint? What are we talking there?
It varies. So there is a £1 billion long-term investment fund, which is over 30 years, and that's meant to be kind of seed funding for private investment, really. So you can invest it or match fund things or borrow against it to draw that money forward. But that's long-term certainty for funding, where councils only ever get a 12-month forward look. So it means we can plan for the long term. And then other funding is there's a £1.5 billion transport fund over 5 years, which will be renewed every 5 years. So that's a fourfold increase in our annual transport budget. There's other bits of capital funding, one-off funding for things like broadband or things like retrofitting homes. There's loads and loads of different pots of money, and the mayor's job is to pull them all together and make a proper strategy out of it.
No, that is fair. And talking about that sort of strategic and the interaction with all the local elements, one of our listeners was concerned that you might get, for example, something that's quite good in Nottingham, the bus service, and in Derby you might get a fantastic library service. They're worried that it'll become more homogenised. What would you say to them?
Well, some of those things, so the libraries, for example, will still be run by council. All that really local stuff that is about what's in your community, what services delivered in your community, is largely still for those councils to decide. It's really the big strategic stuff, like our transport that connects everything together, like regional investment on a big scale, what inward investment you can bring in from around the world into exciting industries, things that affect more than just your street and your community. That's where the mayor will hold sway, really. So we've got to plan properly and locally across the region, but we've also got to have a shared strategy so that we can articulate that out to the government and around the world so we can get the investment in. So people don't need to worry about things in their village or town being dragged over to Nottingham or into Derby, because that's not really how this works. It's about being able to add value in whether that is in North Derbyshire or South Nottinghamshire, right? It's what can you add with the funding, with the powers that we've got to make the existing structures and the existing plans work better.
Well, you talk about more of this inward investment. There's the obvious one that's coming from central government, but what sort of other sources are we talking about here? Is there sort of private partnership type stuff going on?
Well, I think we certainly need to attract that private sector investment, and where Manchester and Birmingham have done really well out of this over the last 8 years since they've had mayors, it's not all been, some of it has been, but not all from taxpayers' money. Where they've got this clear structure, if I'm a private sector investor and I've got one person in Andy Street or Andy Burnham in those places as the mayor to go and speak to, it's much easier to navigate the system, to find that site and find that investment that I want to deliver to create jobs. So the structure helps us to bring that in, and we're already looking at massive investment in clean energy, for example, just as one example. Nottinghamshire is set to be the biggest fusion energy research hub in Europe, with £20-odd billion of investment already lined up for us over the next kind of 15 years. So big opportunities.
Okay, so let's imagine you're the one that gets elected, where every 4 or 5 years on from now, and you're looking back at your time. What's the one thing you want to be saying? I've delivered that, and I'm proud of delivering that.
Well, I think the first and kind of short-term priority is we need to sort the roads out. And as I said, this is a one-off chance, really, to do that with the huge amount of increased funding that we've got to deliver it. So in the first year, I'm going to crack on with a massive resurfacing programme, and residents need to see a really visible, tangible improvement in all of that to be a success. But over the course of the first term, we can certainly work with our bus operators, for example, to improve our routes, to fill the gaps in the bus network, to integrate it with a better ticketing system. There's loads of opportunities in that space, and to build on our investment plans. Like I said, clean energy we've got coming our way, big energy jobs, growth at Rolls-Royce, for example, in Derby. All of these businesses we want to invest and grow. And I want to be creating those exciting job opportunities and the training opportunities for our residents to be able to access all of that.
Well, if you're successful, and in 4 or 5 years' time, we will be checking up on your progress on that. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us here on Bo Radio.
That's a problem. Thanks for your time.
Whoever you choose to vote for, do remember that polls open on Thursday the 2nd of May, and remember to take your ID with you when you vote. The candidates in alphabetical order are Frank Adlington Stringer for the Green Party, Ben Bradley for the Conservatives, Alan Graves for Reform UK, Matt Relf as an Independent, Helen Tamblyn Saville for the Liberal Democrats, and Claire Ward for Labour.